Okay, you're listening to 91.3 Lagos Talks. It is 4:31. You know that at this time of the day and the week, you get talking HR, you get talking, workplace ethics, etc. And it is time for the office. You're listening to 91.3 Lagos Talks. My name is Kola Wale, and we have a lot to catch up on this evening. We're going to begin with the office right now. And as usual, you know that we get to bring in experts in this business to come enlighten us on a few things. Okay. Today on the office, of course, you know that the office is proudly brought to you by the Chartered Institute of Personnel Management of Nigeria, CIPM, and Lagos Talks 91.3. Our topic today is quite interesting, but let me quickly introduce our guest. He is Olanrewaju Ojolo, MCIPM, Head Learning and Development, Polaris Bank. He's got a BA honors from 2007 from the University of Ado-Ekiti, and also a master in managerial psychology from 2016 at the University of Lagos. A full member of CIPMN and MCIPM 2021 is someone who has worked in consulting, in financial services and insurance, as well as oil and gas, as the head learning and development at Polaris Bank, learning and development specialist at Sanlam Nigeria, HR business partner at AOS Orwell Limited, HR generalist at Royal Exchange PLC, HR consultant at Masterminds HRSG Consulting Lagos. So once again, please make a welcome. He joined me via Zoom, Olanrewaju Ojolo. Good to have you join us. Good evening to you.
Good evening, Kolawole. Please confirm you can hear me loud and clear.
Yes, indeed, I can hear you loud and clear. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. Good evening. It's my pleasure to be with you on this call this evening.
I hope I did not bastardize your name, though.
You tried. Olanrewaju Ojolo.
Ojolo.
That's
Pardon
the
me.
son.
Pardon me.
Yes.
Pardon me. You didn't put the army there. If you had put the army there, I would have gotten it right. The army Yoruba. Good to have you join us, Mr. Olanrewaju. So let's get talking this evening. Every organization is expected to have a department in charge of handling the most important resource in the organization, which I think we all agree to be the workers, the human beings, right? So, and that begs the question, what exactly are the duties or what's the mandate of the HR department? And if we know the mandate, what exactly is a good way to, iron out or measure the competency of this department? So today on the show, we'll talk about the human resource department, HR in general, and HR competency, as well as the framework. So give us a quick lowdown of the departments that you call HR, and what are the competencies?
All right, thank you, Kolawole. Thank you for having me once again. I want to say good evening to all the listeners, wherever you are joining this call, listening to Lagos Talk 91.3 FM. I will start by saying the core function, the major responsibility of the Human Resource Department of every organization is to harness, to harmonize, and to ensure that the human capacity within any organization is fully utilized and maximized towards the achievements of the organizational goals. So in essence, what am I trying to say in a very simple language? We have every organization, we have what we call the material resources, the financial resources, and they also have human beings that we refer to as their employees. So the ability to identify capabilities that will drive the goals of the organizations, not just to form part of the organization by being employed, but to work towards what we refer to as performance. So every organization, most organizations are profit-driven. we do not have, though we have organizations that are NGOs, but even NGOs, they have goals. They are driven by goals and performance. So the ability to harness potentials, not only to harness them, to identify them, to attract them, to harness them, to develop them, to reward them towards the achievement of these goals. That's the life cycle of what is expected for every HR department or people operations department, whatsoever name it might be called across different organizations.
Okay, so now we know, I mean, we know what the department is all about. I don't know who will be in the best position to map out KPIs. Maybe it's the department itself or even outsiders. But how on earth do we measure competencies? And is there a framework that HR units work with?
All right. So I will start by you're right. Is the responsibility of the HR function is the HR function that is expected to drive performance management, as you said. Not only that, also drive what we refer to as a competency framework. In other parlance, is being referred to as competency management. So the ability to manage the competence, simply put, what is a competency? Or what are competencies, so to speak? You can say these are the skills, the abilities, the knowledge required to function. In a very simple language, I would say what it requires for any job holder to perform on a job. And it does not stop at skills and knowledge alone. It also involves behavioral requirements. So for every job, for instance, as an OAP, you have competencies, but there are behaviors that are expected to drive performance for you to be effective on the job. These are all what we categorize, and they are referred to as a competency framework. So to speak, we can now say the framework is like the tool, the structure, the system that ensure these competencies are harnessed. These competencies are done in such a way that they are aligned to the organizational goals to ensure there is alignment between what the employees are expected to do and what organizations are expected to achieve. Thank you.
Okay, interesting. You're listening to 91.3 Lagos Talks, and this is The Office. The Office happens Thursdays at this time from 4:30 up until 5. And this evening, well, we have Olanrewaju, Ojolo, MCIPM, is the one who is giving us a lowdown of what the concept of HR competency is all about. So we've spoken about what are the competencies, or what are competencies. We've spoken about the job description of the HR department, and it's giving us a quick info on how important the framework is. But you want to throw more light on the HR competency frameworks in terms of training and retraining, in terms of carrying out evaluation. Is it like a calendar that they work with? Do their competency frameworks differ from company or industry to industry? How does HR maneuver these murky waters?
All right, thank you for that question. The HR competency framework, we can say, like I said, framework refers to the rules, the systems that ensure the smooth running or implementation, starting from the design of the competencies that is required for any organization to achieve their goals. So, so to speak, I can say that the HR competency framework is transferable. What I mean that the skills that you expect to have in the banking industry as an HR person is the same skill, except the business needs. So those businesses are specifically different. But speaking to HR competency frameworks, you'll discover that it's essentially generic skills. So you find HR professionals working across different industry. And specifically for any organization to design and implement HR competency framework, there are basic things that needs to be put in place. I will start by saying what is referred to as job evaluation. I will simply put it as the ability to determine the relative worth and the relative worth of every job role in every organization. Job evaluation, job analysis, you determine what is expected, what are the requirements, what are the qualifications of all the roles. It's at that point that we now start to say, okay, this particular role in HR, these are the competencies that are required to function. These are the number of years, the qualifications, the behaviors that are expected to drive performance. When these are in place, we can now start to say, okay, let's look at this competency. I'm talking about competencies, and they are definitely divided into more categories. Let's say like 3 or 4 categories, depending on the school of thought. So we have core competencies, we have what we call the technical competencies, we have the functional competencies, we have leadership competencies, we also have behavioral. So I've mentioned 4 now. Technical, some also call them functional, some also call them business, depending on the industry where this is being implemented. But specifically, you can categorize both technical, functional, business into one. Then we have what we call the leadership competencies. You also have what we call the behavioral competencies. So for every organization, for every HR competency framework, you have all these categories given, or every of this category named, depending on the environment. The business environment also determines what is operational. So every organization determines what is operational for them. And after all of this has been decided, each of the competencies based on job evaluations have been carried out, will now is okay for you to function as a leader of an organization, as a nation. What are the behavioral competencies? You must have integrity, you must have respect for others. Those are little ones, just to mention. Talking about leadership, you must have vision, you must have charisma, you must someone that people want to listen to, you must be able to communicate your ideas. Those are competencies. And when these competencies have been mapped, usually there are several tools that are being used for them. Use interviews, assessment centers. I've mentioned one before, which is job evaluation. And the process of now bringing all of these together and implementing them. So I will round off this particular question by saying, when it is time to evaluate the competencies of each person, there is something we call competency mapping. The competency mapping process is the process of benchmarking the competencies of an incumbent, someone who is on a roll, to what is expected. So for instance, I am learning and development lead for Polaris Bank. So there are competencies that is expected of me, competencies expected for me to perform on the job. But I have my own current competencies. So I'm mapped to those competencies, and assessment is gotten, and thereby gaps are being brought up. So when these gaps are brought up, these gaps are what we use for developmental purposes. Thank you.
Okay, all right. So I just want to quickly ask about the role of performance appraisals. You spoke about functional competencies, and what comes to mind is, okay, fine, carrying out a routine performance appraisal might be a tool to ascertain the level of competency per worker. Now, would you say that that tool, called or termed performance appraisal, is adequate enough to ascertain every level of competency? Because what comes to mind for me personally is maybe functional competencies. But how would you be able to ascertain the level of competencies in other facets?
All right, thank you for that question. So permit me to go back a little. When we talk about competency frameworks, competency is one of the core functions in HR that the end result is usually deployed across all other functions. One of them you mentioned is performance management. The other ones we have recruitment, you have learning and development. So when you determine the competencies that is expected to perform on a job, that goes a long way. Most organizations only rely on performance appraisal. That is wrong. There's expected to be competency framework in place, out of which the performance appraisal or process, so to speak, will be benchmarked against the competency that is expected. So it is expected that before I begin a job, there is a competency of which will be used. That competency must be used for my recruitment to ascertain whether I'm suitable to function on this job. Let's say, for instance, I eventually get employed. When I eventually start working, it is performance appraisal process that will say, okay, after 6 months or after 1 year, you want to see how far you have done. But what competency framework does is to ensure that performance appraisal or the process itself is benchmarked against a competency, which is the competency framework. So competency framework helps to drive performance. Organizations who have implemented competency frameworks, we know very well that it goes beyond just performance. You have to ascertain, does this particular employee have the competencies to function at optimal level? If not, what are the interventions? That is where competency framework. So even before performance process begins, competency framework has already identified what the issues might be in the nearest future when it comes to organizational performance. So organizations that implement that will be able to drive performance at the core level. That's the essence of competency frameworks. It's not only to performance management, learning and development, recruitment, change management, and all other the value chain of the HR practice. Thank you.
Okay, so I mean, a lot of very young HR professionals might want to, and even non-HR professionals will be curious as to how one can successfully design a competency framework. If you find yourself in an HR department as a young professional and perhaps your boss asks you to draft something out, well, what would you say are the go-to points or how to approach this task of mapping out or drawing out a quality competency framework? How does one successfully design this?
Sorry, your line is breaking.
Okay, so I was asking how one can successfully design a competency framework. For example, you're a young professional just getting into the groove of the HR practice. How does one successfully, implement and draw out a quality HR competency framework?
All right. Competency framework, usually, I would say that for those who are just joining the profession, you will need to have experience, more years of experience for you to understand how to implement or how to even start with designing and implementation of a competency framework. But nonetheless, I will still mention what you need to understand. You need to, first of all, have an overview of the core functions of HR when it has to do with the attraction, selection, that's the recruitment, capacity development, performance management. Then with that, you'll be able to say, okay, the end result of my competency framework, these are the things. But aside that, if I want to implement a competency framework, the first thing is to look at what are the goals, what is the vision of the organization, what are the goals and the objectives. That aside, I will also start by identifying all roles, job roles for the organizations, carry out job analysis, carry out job evaluations, and you have to do several engagements. Now, I mentioned something about what the categories of these core competencies are: the functional, the leadership, and the behavioral. All of these are linked to the vision, the core values of the organization. So if those are not in place, it will be difficult to determine the behavioral patterns that is expected of any job function. So it's more general. It's not something that someone who is coming into the profession can start to implement without first of all starting with what I've mentioned. So when you have the vision of the organization, the goals, what's the business model, what are the performance, what's the performance strategy of the organization. We'll be able to now see, based on your core values, based on the functional areas, then based on the leadership competencies required for an organization to get to point B from A, these are the expected competencies. We'll now start to list them. Not only that, you also start to mention something like competency mapping, but before you get into all of that, you have to also determine what are the proficiency levels. So for instance, I just walked up into an organization as an HR officer. I'm expected to have attraction, selection, and recruitment, as well as interviewing skills. At what proficiency level? You need also to identify and define these proficiency levels to say, okay, basic means this is what it means for you to be. I'm just trying to give an example of a proficiency level. Usually it's categorized into 4. Across different organizations, there are several nomenclatures, but you say basic, intermediate, advanced, and expert. So for every competency, for instance, for interview skills, either you are a basic person, or you are intermediate, or you are advanced, or you are expert. And there are tools that you need to be able to identify that. So when all the competencies have been identified, you also benchmark them against incumbent. There's a whole lot of activities that I solely believe that someone who is new to the profession should not delve into directly. Should first of all understand all other functions, then start to pick it, read it, attend trainings, and begin to see how it has been implemented. What I've been able to do before now is to work in organizations where competency framework have been implemented. Even despite all that I've read, I discovered that, you know, implementation is quite different from what you have in the books. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I want to quickly ask, you know, this is 2023, a lot of tech solutions, a lot of companies are also using tech as solutions to achieving their objectives. I'm curious to know what the HR is doing in this regard. Are they tech tools that HR professionals make use of? Are there specific tech tools, maybe softwares that HR professionals use for things like this?
Yes, there are tools. There are several tools, and for organizations that the employees, if they are above 200, is expected that you should have software. So we have softwares across softwares that most organizations use for the accounting, for the banking. You also find out that some of these software companies, they've come up with HR modules for their software. I don't want to start mentioning that we've been doing free adverts for some of these organizations on this course. So we have several of these, and with the recent inventions with regards to artificial intelligence, with regards to robotics, there are several things that has happened, has taken shape when it comes to data analytics, the field of HR. And HR in Nigeria is also not taking the back seats, especially CIPM. CIPM has done well in that regard to ensure digitization, most of the processes, even some of the activities now of HR, of CIPM in Nigeria, they have been digitized. I remember when I joined the profession, the institute, some years back, you had to travel. I wasn't in Lagos. I had to travel all the way from south to come and register for an exam. No, but now you can sit in the comfort of your home, write your exam, and before you stand up, you get your results. Those are what CIPM and the institute have done. The institute has done with regards to deploying technology and digital innovations to drive the HR practice here in Nigeria. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We would soon wrap up this conversation, but quickly, how would you say competency frameworks impact the organization's, sustainability? What level of impact does this have on the growth and even sustainability of organizations?
When you talk about sustainability, for every organization that wants to remain competitive in the marketplace, there has to be a competency framework in place. Competency framework, CF, will facilitate the recruitment the selection process with a strong fit to the role. It's also going to help when it comes to setting performance expectations and the evaluation of all categories of staff. It's going to help in organization competencies and evaluation of the role holders. And competency framework help organizations to project into the future. So you know what you have. You are not just doing wishy-washy, or you are just trying to predict unnecessary. You have data to back up. You can say, if you want to scale up in the next 5 years, when you look within you, when you have the competency matrix, you have the skills gaps report, you'll be able to see an overview. Do you have the competencies to drive what you want to achieve in the next 5 years? So for every organization, competency framework is critical for sustainability, for competition, to remain competitive in the marketplace, to have skills. Not only that, to retain employees, to have them with you. You must have a competency framework in place within the system.
Okay, you're listening to 91.3 Lagos Talks, and this has been The Office. But quickly, and lastly, Mr. Olanrewaju, you work in Nigeria, and I know you might have international companies you consult for, but let's talk about Nigeria now. You've spoken about competency frameworks and how it's important to use that as a metric if a company is intending to stay relevant, right? But how do you mix and match this with the Nigerian reality when sometimes you're in a company and, you know, the CEO, who sometimes might be the alpha and omega of the company, wanting to call the shots, you know, is making it difficult for, you know, HR professionals to do their job. Have you, during the course of your career, have you come across situations where the data was saying something, but those who call the shots in the organization were trying to do something else?
Yes, I've been in that situation before, and you always find that not only in Nigeria, even in Europe, in US, everywhere, you will find this situation. So it's not peculiar to Nigeria alone. Even though I've not worked in Europe, I've been in Nigeria, but I work for organization that has presence across continents. So you discover that it's the same thing that is applicable everywhere. But in Nigeria, as HR professionals, all we do is to manage the situation as it is. You must have what we call emotional intelligence. You must have what we call political quotient. That's a PQ. You must have that. And you must be able to advise when it is time for you to advise the organizational leaders to say, these are the facts. You are not the one to make the final decision, but as professionals, what we do is to put the facts at the table. But if the leadership decide to go, yes, there is absolutely nothing you can do. But in most cases, when you have made the facts known and it's glaring, nobody will come back to say, oh, you just kept quiet and you have not made, you have not put your feet on the ground to say this is what is best for the organization without any prejudice.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Olanrewaju Ojolo, MCIPM Head, Learning and Development, Polaris Bank. Educational and professional backgrounds are something to open my mouth to. But thank you very much, Mr. Ojolo, for coming by. We look forward to having you at some other time.
Thank you so much, Kolawole. Thank you for the engagement, and thank you for CIPM for giving us this platform. And finally, let me say this about the institute. You can join the institute where you can move forward your career. If you're just joining the HR profession, we encourage you to be part of the CIPM. The CIPM has grown and is still growing. We have fantastic leadership. The CEO, they are working tirelessly to ensure that the practice of HR in Nigeria is sustainable and we get to the greatest height. Thank you. Thank you, Kolawole.
Thank you very much. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Of course, you know that The Office, which you just listened to, is proudly brought to you by the Chartered Institute of Personnel Management of Nigeria, CIPM, and Lagos Talks 91.3. Until next Thursday, we get to bring you another fantastic episode of The Office. So keep listening to 91.3. My name is Kolawole Falodu.
Thank you.